Mortal Kombat's fame exceeds beyond the borders of just the fighting game genre, as characters like Sub-Zero and Scorpion are among the most iconic in all of gaming. Now, Ed Boon and his team have been developing the franchise for 3 decades as Mortal Kombat celebrates its 30-year anniversary here in 2022. And while we've seen plenty of successful characters join the fray in that time, not everyone has been a smash hit. Today, we're looking at the worst newcomers added to the playable combat canon in each of the 3D era games. This means we're picking out the least successful newcomers added in Mortal Kombat 4, Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon. These fighters were met with a combination of apathy and hatred from fans, and sometimes even developers, as they didn't prove to be compelling additions that would enrich the wider Mortal Kombat roster, but instead came off as widely bland, annoying, forgettable, and in some cases even offensive to fans. I'm John Velociraptor Guerrero for EventHubs, and these are the worst playable new characters introduced in each Mortal Kombat game, the 3D era.
Round 1.
Mortal Kombat 4. Mortal Kombat 4 dropped in 1997 and was the franchise's first venture into 3D fighting game space. This game featured the first playable appearances of 8 characters including Raiko, Jarek, Tanya, Quan Chi, Kai, Fujin, Shinnok, and though he'd been around as an NPC since MK1, Goro. This was also the first time Meat was playable, and let's get that out of the way right now. Joke or meta characters like Meat and Mocap are often regarded as terrible, and for good reason, because they're by nature designed around fitting in as a joke or a special nod more than an enticing reason for people to buy a game. Either of these two could take up obvious spots on this list, but we're just not going to include them in the running. Getting back to MK4, there are 3 characters that stand out here as possibly the worst: Raiko, Kai, and Jarek. Now, Raiko wasn't initially planned for MK4 and wound up replacing Noob Saibot after developers decided they wanted fewer ninjas on the roster. He had no real identity in this game, and though that would change in the years to come, Raiko was clearly incomplete upon his debut. I mean, look at this ending. As forgettable as Raiko was, Kai was even more so. His handstand stance and vertical fireballs were kind of interesting at first, but the character was just about as bland as Liu Kang in MK1. Jarek was a shameless Kano clone minus any of Kano's charisma. Almost nothing about him is original, save for maybe his weird ground pound thing that looks like he breaks his own back while doing it, and none of his imitations were superior to the originals. You probably do recognize Jarek though, and that's because he's part of the most infamous ending in all of Mortal Kombat, and that's saying something. A bizarre situation with terribly cringy voice acting. This ending cemented Jarek into our minds as one of the worst Mortal Kombat characters in the entire franchise. While Kai and Raiko fade into apathetic obscurity, Jarek stands out as one of the worst, though entertaining, things to happen to the franchise, and so he wins the title of Worst New Playable Edition in MK4.
Round 2.
Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Deadly Alliance introduced yet another major update to the franchise and set a kind of trend that would define Mortal Kombat for almost the next 10 years. Developers at Midway took on some major risks by trying out a handful of new approaches, perhaps most notably in their decision to legitimately kill off Liu Kang in the opening cinematic. This sort of fresh start opened the door for a whopping 10 never-before playable characters, including Bull Raicho, Draman, Frost, Su Hao, Kenshi, Li Mei, Mavado, Natara, and Blaze. Now, Kenshi seems to be the most beloved of these. Frost and Boraicho definitely have their haters, but are still solid. Natara hasn't been brought back outside of Armageddon, but she's a cool vampire character and often gets brought up in conversations about characters who should come back, so, let's just cut to the chase. Blaze, Mavado, and Draman all kind of give him a run for his money, but Su Hao is our winner out of the losers here. Su Hao is the most hated character in Mortal Kombat. His design was remarkably unremarkable, he was yet another Kano ripoff, and had virtually nothing going for him. His visuals don't really agree with one another, his fighting stances look awkward, his moves are really not satisfying to perform. In a 2010 edition of Game Informer magazine, Ed Boon noted that Su Hao and Draman were his least favorite characters in the series. John Vogel, one of the 4 original Mortal Kombat devs, expressed a ton of dismay at having to bring the character back for Armageddon. As such, he's been killed off no fewer than 5 times in game and comic lore. There are plenty of characters who get less than enthusiastic responses from fans, but Suhao came together so poorly that people went out of their way to express how much they disliked him. His existence legit offended Mortal Kombat fans, and so he's really the only acceptable answer for worst newcomer in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance.
Round 3.
Mortal Kombat Deception. While Deadly Alliance may have had the worst character ever, Deception gets the award for having the highest quantity of bad newcomers. Of its 8 fresh faces, which include Ashura, Dairu, Darius, Havoc, Hotaru, Kira, Cobra, and Shujinko, almost all were hit with apathy from fans. This actually makes choosing a worst hard, as they all kind of fade together into a pile of blandness. And honestly, you can't really go wrong with the throw a dart at the board approach for Deception. As forgettable as everyone here is, we're gonna give it to Dairu for being the least distinctive and most bland of everyone. He's neither a good nor bad guy in the story, and otherwise reuses the whole vengeance for a murdered family thread. His fatalities were laughably bad, and there's nothing memorable about him visually except for maybe that he's got a red tattoo on his balding head. You can take one look at this guy and immediately hate him for just how uninspired he is. For special moves, Dairu has a kick that shoots a fireball, and even copied Jarek's dumb ground pound. His fire teleport is kind of cool, especially because it confuses the opponent for a moment, but then you realize that almost all of his moveset is otherwise borrowed from the last game, as he has the Wing Chun fighting style that Mavato had, the Eskrima fighting style that Quan Chi had, and the weapon moves that Kung Lao used in Deadly Alliance. Now compare Dairu, or any of these floppy who cares actors,
10 points!
to the series' shining example of intrigue, Scorpion. Scorpion is a ninja with a veiled identity that makes you immediately wonder about who he is and what his motivations might be, especially after you notice all the threatening blades and pointed edges about his costume. His trademark attack is among the most iconic in gaming, as he nails you with an unconventional weapon, yells out in a very personalizing catchphrase, and then reels you in for tons of punishment. Midway also spent plenty of time fleshing out a meaningful story and contrasting Scorpion with the similar-looking Sub-Zero, and slowly but surely did reveal the answers to many of the questions his appearance and fight style naturally posed. Fans couldn't help but get over here once they got their first taste of Scorpion, but you could easily skip Dairu every time you played Deception and not think twice about it.
Round 4.
Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Armageddon wasn't a whole lot better than its predecessor, but this time developers were bogged down because they went with an everyone is here approach and included every single character from every roster beforehand. Now that said, they still introduced a handful of never-before playables, including Dagon, Kintaro, Taven, Onaga, Moloch, and then Meat, as well as both female and male Chameleon got their own unique movesets. Armageddon was an example of quantity over quality, and the fact that developers burdened themselves with a 63-character roster, along with the Creative Fighter, Conquest, and Motor Combat modes, really showed, as they had no creative mana left for characters. This is another throw a dart at the board scenario in terms of which newcomer might be the worst, but we're going to give Taven the trophy because not only is he one of the 2 truly newcomers to the series, the other being his brother Dagon, but he's also the game's protagonist. This means the fact that Taven fails to capture much interest or remain in our memories is especially bad because he's our leading man and supposed to be the hero of the story. This was clearly a time where creative juices were spent on trying to expand the overall Mortal Kombat experience. The franchise did just fine riding the momentum of their already established roster of returning powerhouses, but fighting games depend immensely on having interesting and satisfying characters, and in the 3D era, Mortal Kombat let this slip a little too much in terms of newcomers. We'll be exploring how things played out in the 3rd and most modern Mortal Kombat decade in our next entry in this series, and if you haven't already seen it, be sure to check out our worst characters in the early MK titles video too. Until next time, I've been John Velociraptor Guerrero for EventHubs. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.